everyone, welcome to today's presentation on parenting the emotionally explosive child with Ariel and myself, Amber.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ariel Horvitz. I'm a member of the cognitive behavioral therapy team here at the Family Institute. I'm a clinical psychologist with a background in concentration in child and adolescent work, and I see young children up into emerging adults.
And my name is Amber Przybyla. I'm a board certified art therapist and licensed professional counselor. I have a lot of experience working with children and adolescents, experiencing symptoms of anxiety, depression, ADHD, and trauma. And I focus a lot in on helping children and adolescents who are struggling with emotional regulation, issues with behavior, and just managing life stressors. So we want to go over a couple of objectives for today. The three big ones we want to keep in mind is caregivers will be able to identify what are developmentally appropriate behaviors for elementary age children. Two, caregivers will learn how attunement and behavioral strategies can improve the parent-child relationship. And three, caregivers will learn coping strategies to use when parenting a dysregulated child.
So this is a presentation that Amber and I work quite a bit with, and sometimes it can look a little bit similar to like the vignette that we're going to present on. So Martha is 43. She's a mother of a 10-year-old daughter named Veronica. And when talking about Veronica, she says, this is a creative child. She excels at school. She has all these strengths. She's passionate and energetic. But also, she's noticed that Veronica has some big feelings. So we know kids are little holistic beings and they're well-rounded, and we all come with our strengths and we all come with our areas of support. And what Martha started to notice was that Veronica's big feelings as a young child seemed to also continue with other people, that other people were giving Martha this feedback of, hey, Veronica seems like a sensitive kid, or she has big feelings. Martha also noticed there was a little bit of difference between Veronica and her peers, where other children may brush things off or go with the flow when something happens and are quick to get back on track. She noticed that Veronica seemed to stay stuck in that tough moment and had trouble regulating her feelings quickly and calmly. While she's always had some tantrums at home, Martha feels like this continues to worsen with age and started to notice about twice a week on average something setting her off and large tantrums occurring. Some large tantrums we may see include hitting, throwing items, yelling, and for every child, the tantrum may look differently, and for every family system, that may look differently. But noticing that not only are the big feelings happening and they seem to be increasing with age and complex situations, but also the behaviors seem to be worsening. Martha's also unsure how to respond to these situations. She typically feels frustrated and gets overwhelmed by behavior. She wants to get things back on track and feels exhausted. So it's not just Veronica going through the emotional tantrum, but Martha having to be there with her child and witness her child going through these feelings is also noticing some emotional pieces. And she also worries what others will think about her daughter. Will they start questioning her own parent choices when these tantrums escalate? Oftentimes in this population, we see a lot of worry about, am I doing the right thing? What are other people thinking? And will my child be judged in a negative light, even though I know they have all these positive strengths? So if that sounds something similar to what you've experienced or your clients have experienced, these are kind of the steps that Amber and I go through in terms of working with this population. And the first is to be really settled and grounded in a developmental perspective. Non-compliant, explosive behaviors, defiant behaviors, stubborn behaviors of kind of digging your heels in, they fall under normal developmental expectations typically. Oftentimes they stem from kind of a developmental need. And one of my favorite theories that I ground my work in is Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. So if you want more information on that, please feel free to kind of research into that work. But when you look at the first, it's second, third, and fourth stage, the first stage being trust versus mistrust, which is infancy. So we aren't touching there. But when you look at those first real three stages of childhood, you can see how noncompliance or defiant behavior or big emotions even can be woven into them pretty easily. So with autonomy, autonomy is all about I can do things myself. This is where we start to build those self-control skills, which means we may be pushing other people away and we may be noticing like, I want my own bodily autonomy. I want to be in charge of what I do. And when someone tries to take that from me, it feels developmentally inappropriate. It feels like invasive. And so you may see kids in that age range have tantrums related to that. An example of autonomy is potty training. Again, being in charge of your own body. Initiative versus guilt in that 4 to 6 range. Initiative is all about I can make change. I can assert myself over my environment and I can create change, right? So it's about fostering exploration, decision making, and allowing the child to take the lead. Think about like the 4-year-old who wants to build a pillow fort in the house and takes all the pillows and all the blankets to make this creation, right? And then industry, right, that 6 to 12 age range, which is closer to the age range that Amber and I are going to be focusing on with that middle childhood, that industry is about I can create and be successful. I have the ability to feel competent and proud and successful in skills and tasks. So you can think of that 10-year-old who's excited to show you an A that they got on their project at school, or even thinking about a middle child who, a young child who wants to build a lemonade stand to make money and save money to buy their own toys. All three of these stages can be hand in hand with what we see when kids start to become non-compliant or start to have larger emotional responses to the environment trying to impose a certain boundary. A common tantrum trigger is the word no, right? Saying no to your kid about something. And oftentimes we can think of that as very developmentally appropriate, that this child is just trying to enact those bolded words, right? And understand how, okay, my kid's working on this developmental lens. How can I support that while also maybe setting some important boundaries while they're having these emotional feelings? When considering appropriateness in terms of developmental appropriateness, what we look for as therapists is what's the intensity of the emotion? How high does it get? How long does that emotion last? Can the child regulate themselves quickly and kind of that idea of the vignette, right? She wants her daughter to get back on track. How long does it take them to get back on track? How do they do that? But then also, how much distress is in the system? If this is a family with tons of young children, having regular tantrums can be really distressing in that family system in a different way than if this is an only child who both parents are able to kind of drop everything and focus on them when an emotional need arises. So those three areas is what we think about. And when we think, is this appropriate for maybe some therapeutic interventions, or does this fall more in a developmental normative range? We also can think about, I'm going to go through internal workings of behavior as well, which is really that emotional and cognitive or neurological side of these behaviors. So emotionally, something is clearly triggered for your child. Oftentimes in these clients, we see an underlying of either anxiety or anger. Anger's main job is to tell you that something feels unfair. And so that may lead this feeling of, I need to write it. I need justice for it. I need you to understand where I'm coming from because this feels unfair. The same thing can be said with anxiety triggering these larger emotions. Anxiety tells us something feels dangerous and I need to get out of there. And so if you as a parent, or maybe you're taking your kid to their first hockey game, right? And they feel anxious, maybe they're not saying I feel anxious. Maybe they're having a big tantrum. They're having big emotions. They're crying, they're screaming, they're refusing to leave. The question is, it may look angry, but it may actually be anxiety underneath in that they feel like something is dangerous. You're forcing them to do it, so they're fighting off against you, right? This is triggering that fight or flight reaction, which goes into that cognitive and neurological standpoint. Tantrums often indicate that activation of the fight or flight nervous system, which we all have. It's to keep us alive, right? That fight or flight, or sometimes we see freeze as well in there, is just a part of your sympathetic nervous system being activated as part of an evolutionary standard of just keeping humans alive and functioning. We needed it to run away from predators. We needed it to assess whether or not we could go out in that thunderstorm or if it was dangerous weather. However, sometimes it's a little too good at its job and we have something that's going off, kind of like a fire alarm going off for burnt toast rather than an actual fire. So tantrums and those big emotions usually indicate something's going on with that sympathetic nervous system and a child's really engaged in that fight or flight process. During this time, our emotion brain is activated. So that hindbrain that has this system involved tends to be overactivated, which means you might see more impulsivity, you might see more quick physical actions, and you might see more focus on immediate relief. How do I get out of this? Rather than what we'd like to see, right? That frontal lobe, that thinking brain right here, where that's really what stores our slow, thought out problem solving, weighing the pros and cons, thinking logically. And during fight or flight, that part of our brain isn't as activated. It kind of gets turned off a little bit, right? In terms of that emotional brain taking over for survival reasons. So it's really important to keep in mind that when you see your child going through that emotional dysregulation, they're in a place where that hindbrain, that emotion brain is overactivated, and that thinking brain frontal lobe is less activated and less engaged in the problem solving process, which may explain some of the behavior choices you see, or maybe even some of the language that's used during those moments. We also want to consider the response to behavior. So behavioral impacts both internally and externally. How does this tantrum make the individual feel in terms of, does it release something? Does it engage with anxiety or anger in a way that's reinforcing? Like, do I get to remove the discomfort, especially around impulsivity? Impulsivity tends to be, how do I get rid of this feeling in my body? Which maybe I'm so angry, how do I get rid of this feeling? Well, maybe I punch. Or I'm so anxious, how do I get rid of this feeling? Maybe I run, I elope. And tantruming behaviors tend to be impulsive in nature. But we also want to think externally, what happens with these behaviors. So when a tantrum or an moment of emotional dysregulation occurs, externally, what responses are they getting from the environment? We know oftentimes certain behaviors may reinforce the kind of tantruming, emotional problem solving of, I know that when I feel this way, when I feel anxious, if I explode, cry, run, then my parent will what? Will my parent allow me to stay home from the thing that's making me nervous? Will I not be allowed into, I'll use hockey practice again, hockey practice because I'm dysregulated. So now I get to avoid it even more. So we want to think about why a behavior may actually be reinforced, because once a behavior is reinforced, we easily jump to it. And then it becomes nothing is logically thought out or slowed down. It's just, oh, I have this feeling. This is what I'm doing. Oh, I have this feeling. These are the behaviors I'm showing, because I know that it will get asserted. And this is a subconscious level. This is not a level where a kid's going, ooh, I know if I cry, my parents will let me get out of hockey. A lot of this time, sometimes there's that. But most of the time, what I see in my work is the child is just learned that this sequence happens over and over again. And so there's a subconscious learning here where they have this reinforced jump to large emotions, jump to large behaviors, which means we're going to be more likely to see it reenacted over and over again. So like in the vignette, we may notice that this is happening now. Oh, it used to be once a month. Now it's once a week. Now it's twice a week. Now it's every time we try to do this one activity. And so with that response to behavior, we really want to be considering what we call the ABCs, which is just a nice way to say antecedent, which means what happened before the behavior, which for us in this presentation is about the explosive emotions, and then C, the consequences. Consequences doesn't necessarily mean the negative things. We think about consequences like you're going to lose screen time as a consequence. Consequence can also be you got to skip hockey. It could also be you got mom and dad's attention now. So consequence is anything afterwards that may reinforce or punish a behavior. When thinking about the ABCs of your child's large emotional explosions or tantrums, you want to think about what caused that explosion of emotion. What was the antecedent? What was happening before? And I mean, even going down to like, what time of day was it? Is it possible that they were hungry, right? We know like hangry is a feeling that emerges. What are those other factors that were going on before? What kind of request was made? What was the environment like? Were you in a really crowded, loud place, or were you in a quiet, known, comfortable setting? So thinking through what could have caused this explosion? What could have triggered it? Then, what was your child attempting to communicate with their behaviors? Were they attempting to communicate that I'm scared, this feels dangerous, I don't know what's going on? Or I'm angry, this feels unfair, I need you to hear me and take me seriously. Was there anything that that behavior was attempting to communicate, and just because of that neurological activation and that dysregulation emotionally, was not able to come across in a very clear, calm manner? And then consequence C, how their actions can support reducing the emotional explosions in the future. So how can you as a parent think about what were the actions you took after that behavior? And is there anything that you as a parent or caregiver or an adult in a child's life can do to reduce the likelihood of that explosion happening? Are there things we can control in terms of antecedents? But also consequence wise, is there anything we're doing in the moment of that behavioral explosion that may actually be reinforcing the behavior or even accidentally punishing good communication? Is there anything in terms of, again, antecedent before a tantrum even occurs that we can do in terms of modeling having good emotional regulation that calms us and allows us to directly communicate? And so Amber is going to go through one of the first steps in terms of thinking about how as a caregiver, as an adult in a child's life, you can regulate those emotions that you have that come up when these explosive emotions are being, displayed in front of you. What you can do to kind of model that calmness and take care of your own emotional experience during this time.
Thanks, Ariel. And I want to acknowledge to any caregivers watching this, they might be wondering, why am I focusing on my own regulation when my child is the one exploding? And the reason being is like, let's take this back to control. We can't control your child exploding, not exploding. We can control our responses and we can learn from our responses. And the more calm we are as the adults, that's going to help us move through that tantrum or that explosion of emotions quicker. And hopefully with less explosion, shorter explosion, smaller one. And so what we want to kind of offer is just some different things to try. Some things might work, some things might not feel great. It's really about practicing and seeing what fits and what feels good. And so some of our general parental, regulation tips start with when you model calmness, the child is more likely to return to calm. So when we think about navigating these explosive emotions, we also want to minimize the length of time the child is dysregulated, because I'm sure all of you have had a really bad day. The longer those hard emotions sit with us, the more exhausted we are, the harder it is to eat, the harder it is to do things. And we know when we have a hard day how that ripples out. So we really want to try to minimize what the child's going through, but also minimize your emotional output too, because it's exhausting when a child's dysregulated. And so it's thinking about how can we be as calm as possible now so that we are also minimizing the ripple effects and the impact on everyone's levels of emotional regulation. Another one is taking deep breaths. Do not be afraid to pause and take a deep breath, because once the explosion of emotions is happening, it's happening. So take as many deep breaths as you need. Use those deep breaths to pause. Also having neutrality around behaviors. And I know this can be really challenging when your child is throwing things, hitting people, swearing. The more that you are reacting, the more we're going to feed into the dysregulation, the more we're going to increase conflict as well. And so when we are neutral about the behaviors, we can kind of really focus on the key piece here, which is getting the child regulated so that frontal lobe's going to be more activated and we can talk it out. And so one of the things when we're talking about behaviors that I know if they're happening at school, at public, at a friend's family's house, that might kind of lead us to feel really activated because we feel embarrassed, we feel ashamed about what our child is doing, is reminding yourself that if they could stop themselves, they would. So they can't. And we have to accept that. And the quicker we can accept that and be neutral, the quicker we can work on different behaviors. The other thing is validating emotions. And so, validating emotions, what we mean by that is just labeling what you observe. So, often I will hear a child say it's unfair, like Ariel was referencing. One way we can validate that is, I understand that it's unfair. You're right. You get you have to go to bed earlier than I do. And the reason is because your brain is still growing. You have to be up in the morning for school. I might, as the adult, need to do some cleaning before I lay down. I might also say, I wish I could go to bed. I'm so tired. But as the adult, I have a couple other things I need to do first. And so when we validate the feeling, we are actually helping neutralize conflict. They can not want to go to bed on time and still go to bed. They cannot want to go to hockey practice, as Ariel was saying, and they could still go. That's always the biggest message I say to kids and my families. We cannot want to do something and then still go do it because that's a life skill. And then the other piece is talking calmly and slowly with your child. And I emphasize calm and slow because this is also going to help bring awareness to your own regulation while you're being there for your child. Because let's face it, when someone's dysregulated, no matter how small or young, no matter who they are in our lives, their dysregulation is going to impact our ability to regulate. So when we take these intentional steps of being calm, breathing, slowing down how we talk, we're going to kind of notice one, what's happening with them, but also it gives us some space to understand our own internal responses. And and then again, don't be afraid to take those pauses. These intentional moments of silence help with the co-regulation. It also can help you be curious about what's going on. And then the other thing is attuning into your emotions and thoughts, which is what the pausing, the calm, the slow will do. Because you might notice when my child is slapping one of their friends, all of a sudden I'm feeling guilty or shame about me as a parent and what that other parent might think. And that's huge because if shame and guilt show up, and you're trying to help your child, it might make you more dysregulated. It might start bringing up a bunch of stuff, and now we're so deep in our own feelings and thoughts. Our child is deep in their feelings and thoughts, and we're just getting to the stuck point where, again, this is how more disruptions happen, more conflict happens in this dysregulation. And then just reminding yourself, tantrums and explosive behaviors happen when the child cannot cope with a big emotion. That's all it is. Something has come up, they cannot handle it, explosion happens. And we all, in our own ways, know what that is like. Whether it happened when we were little, whether it happened last week because of traffic or work. I think reminding ourselves that yes, yes, we see these behaviors and they're troubling, but really what this is about is your child's having a hard time. And you are their best advocate and ally in helping them move through it and figuring out what we need to do. So we talked about some tips, but I also want to talk about just some strategies. So one is taking care of yourself. And I know you're sitting here listening, going, how do I do that? There's so much happening. I only have so much time. And that's very true. And so I think it's also finding when you can moments to take care of yourself. Again, your child's dysregulated and they're just screaming. No harm is being caused. They're not throwing things. Take that moment. Go get a drink of water. Let them know, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm going to sit down and take some deep breaths. Those are ways you can kind of take care of yourself in the moment without us asking you to carve out more time in your day. Of course, though, get the support you need. Lean on friends, family, therapy. Do what you can if you have access to those tools. Also, another parental regulation strategy is really acknowledging when things are going well with your child. And part of that is because we want to be mindful to not have just this negative viewpoint of our child. Often I see with kids when there is chronic and significant dysregulation is everyone starts focusing more on the negatives, and those positives that the child does have, they just go unnoticed more often. And so when we can acknowledge, like, thank you for opening the door, or I appreciate you packed your lunch today. That was really great. Or thanks for remembering your homework folder. Those little things are going to fill up your child, and they're going to feel more capable and confident in themselves. And also they're connecting with you, and they feel like you are a part of their team. Again, I'm going to say it, I'll probably say it again. Deep breaths, breathe through it. Intentional pauses, unless there's an immediate safety risk. Now, obviously, if your child is throwing sharp objects, hitting, kicking, screaming, biting, we need to attend to that immediate risk first. But again, if there's no immediate danger, slow down. Because the kid's at 100, you don't want to be at 100 with them. And then be aware of how the tantrums or your child's behaviors may trigger you. So the more you can know what those triggers are, the better prepared you are to be regulated. One example I love to give is I really don't like loud sounds. And when the kids I work with start screaming, I have to remind myself, like, we got this. I don't love loud sounds, but you know what? They're having a hard time. And then I know going into this, every time it happens, that I'm just going to need to take a couple extra steps so that I can remain calm and not activated. Because the reality is, we are going to trigger each other. Your child is going to trigger you. It's inevitable. That's just part of life. We have to learn, though, to identify and move through it and reduce our own reactivity. Reminding yourself also, the goal is to help your child regulate, then address the other parts of the behavior that happened in the tantrum. Because again, when your child is dysregulated, the frontal lobe is not as active, you can't reason with them. It's not going to happen. And so when we can get them calm and regulated, we can come back and then start talking about those more dangerous or concerning behaviors or the words they used. And then the other is to offer to engage in coping strategies with your child or modeling coping. So often I hear this a lot from families. We talk about regulating and offering that when the child's having a tantrum, and then the child's like, no, I don't want to do it. It makes sense. They can't be reasoned with. And so when we model the coping, that can be another way to show them, just other options besides what their brain is automatically responding to. And so that might look like, I see that you're clenching your fists right now because you're so mad because this is so unfair. You know what? I imagine that doesn't feel good. So I'm actually gonna I'm just gonna kind of do this. Like, I wonder if that might feel good. Or just telling them, like, it looks like you're having a hard time breathing. I'm just gonna take a couple breaths. Sometimes I even mirror how they breathe and then slow down to just call their attention to it. Again, we're not telling them they're doing anything wrong. We're just helping them try to move through. As an art therapist, I always default to art, but again, drawing or doodling, like I will even do this with my clients when they're dysregulated and they're like, don't talk to me, I can't be reasoned with. Sometimes just doing something and sitting with them, all of a sudden they're like, wait, what are you doing? It almost is like a distraction that kind of catches their attention, and that can be a way to kind of shift out of that emotional dysregulated state. Listening to music can be helpful, whether that is putting that on for yourself, or if you know the child loves some certain calming music. Again, if they're dysregulated, that music might just be another way to connect with some different feelings, some different emotions. Using a fidget for yourself, always a great idea. I love a fidget because again, you can fiddle and move something, helping keeping your body regulated while moving through this tantrum and this explosion of emotion. Another one is lie on the floor, because when we can just kind of slow down, if you're laying on the floor, your child's going to be like, what are you doing? You again might catch their attention, which might help them. But also, if you're laying on the floor, you're going to feel grounded. You're going to feel your own sense of calm. And again, do this if there's no safety concerns. And then you can use your five senses to notice what's around you. So using, whether that be picking out, how many things you can see in the room that are the color brown, or just noticing the different sounds you can hear outside of your child's dysregulation. Anything to keep you in the present moment. The more present you are, again, this is going to help you stay regulated. And then if there's not a safety risk in the immediate future, you can also take a break. So we can get the child calm and regulated, and then you can say, you know what, this was really tough. Why don't we go do fill in the blank and then get yourself more regulated to then talk about the behaviors. I know when these behaviors, this dysregulation, these tantrums show up, we almost go into this immediate response of like, we need to fix it. And sometimes we actually need to pause and then come back together to really resolve and talk through and think about what happened differently. So this other piece that I want to talk about is attunement. So one of the ways I work with all of my clients is really drilling into the relationship, really looking at attunement in the session, looking at the child's attunement with different caregivers or trusted adults. And so what we're going to talk about is what is attunement first. And that is the practice of being seen and heard. This teaches emotional regulation and builds a secure attachment. And attunement begins at birth and it's going to continue throughout life, our entire life. And caregivers are really the first people who we learn to attune with. And that's because once a baby is born, we're the first people that they interact with. And part of how attunement works is it involves the brain and the nervous system. And so, way to think about it is, if a baby cries because they're hungry, the caregiver comes in and feeds them. And so the baby learns when I'm in distress, when I'm hungry, this person's going to take care of me and provide for me. And the more that that happens, as the baby is putting out the signals of, I need help, I need support, the brain in the nervous system are actually going to learn to regulate, and they're also going to feel safe with you. When a child feels safe and secure in the relationship, they are able to regulate better. And then safety and connection is built through attunement, because again, if we go back to baby crying, they know that when they cry, when they are like, I'm in distress, here's this caregiver that's going to come in and help me. And why this process is really crucial for emotional regulation skills is that when a baby's in distress, we're the ones that help calm them and soothe them, whether that's rocking, whether that's playing with them, whether it's kisses and hugs and cuddles. All of those things are helping the baby learn how to regulate. As much as it might be hard to hear, we need other people to help and support us. And so fundamentally, like this is coming down from birth. And this is something we continue to need and cultivate and develop as we get older. And then the other piece about attunement is through mirroring, which is nonverbal body language. It's labeling emotions, it's providing emotional support, and creating a predictable and responsive environment. And so what that means is, if you are, for instance, constantly fidgeting, maybe you're a very nervous person. I know I am sometimes. And when we do that, that might make other people nervous. And now that doesn't mean you need to stop and be self-conscious about it, but it's recognizing that when our bodies are calm, that our children's bodies are going to be calmer. When we label our feelings or label someone else's feelings, whether that's through, I'm noticing that you're crying and this movie was really sad. Like, what's going on? That is helping the child learn that this thing happens, this emotion comes up, and they're tied together. And then providing emotional support. And that comes down through the basic stuff of child learning to ride a bike and they fall. And it's just being like, oh, that's really tough. Ooh, do we need to get a Band-Aid? Do we need to clean that up? And creating a predictable and responsive environment, it's really, if I do this, I know my parent's going to show up for me. If I break the rules, I know that this kind of consequence is going to happen. There's no guesswork. There's no fear of the response. It's if A happens, B will follow. And then some parent traits to think about for attunement is being self-attuned. So being aware of yourself, how you experience and operate in the world, what your triggers are, and then being flexible and recognizing that your child has their own personality and we can't really control that. And so how we think we might need to operate as a parent might need some flexibility to actually fit the personality and the emotional needs of the child. And that might look differently across each child. And so we need that flexibility while maintaining the predictable, stable, responsive environment. So you can have two different personalities in children and still have consequences for behavior, or they can still have the same bedtime. So it's that kind of balance. Um, and I would say don't overthink it. I know it's easier said than done, but I think the more that you can just be curious as you go through your parenting journey, you will start to develop the self-attunement and the flexibility as you go. So the other pieces we're going to talk about in this relationship piece is rupture and repair. So rupture is the breakdown in connection between two people due to conflict, hurt, or unmet needs. Ruptures are normal. Everyone's going to have ruptures. When your child has a tantrum, that might cause a rupture. When there's conflict, that's a rupture. A disagreement is a rupture. So there's lots of different things that can cause it. And often this happens when the needs are not met through the caregiver. Behaviors that often can lead to a rupture are like missing verbal cues. So if your child says they're hungry and you tell them you just ate, well, they're still saying they're hungry. So we need to address that. Missing nonverbal cues. So your child, slams the door and you ignore it, and then 20 minutes later they're hitting their sibling. Okay, hey, heard you slam the door. What's going on? So we want to be mindful and aware of these things. Misunderstandings or communication breakdowns, those just happen. Sometimes we don't understand. Yelling, abuse, so emotional, physical, sexual, or verbal abuse is going to just lead to ruptures. Passive aggressive behavior, neglect, whether it's emotional or physical, being dismissive of the child's emotions or experiences, emotional dysregulation of the child and the caregiver, you as the caregiver, and then also just a lack of accountability. So focusing on blame. All of these different behaviors cause the child and the caregiver to stay separated, or they might cause them to separate. And that will lead to a disruption of our connection with the other person, which can lead to hurt feelings, damaged trust, tension. And ruptures in attunement, I want to kind of highlight, that are caused by abuse and neglect can have a long-term impact on the child's ability to have healthy and secure relationships. So I want to highlight the abuse neglect piece so that you as the caregiver are not thinking every rupture is going to ruin my kid. That's not the case. That's why we're also going to talk about repair, because that is part of this process. And so just like rupture is normal, repair is normal too. Every relationship will have ruptures and we come back together. So repair is rebuilding connection, trust, or safety after the rupture. This does not need to happen right away. You can create a plan on when you will repair with your child. Conflicts are going to happen. So the cycle of rupture and repair teaches children how to navigate misunderstandings, conflict, and challenging emotions. It's important in the repair process we acknowledge everyone's feelings. So I feel this. Those I statements are key. And then naming what happened, but focusing on the facts, not the interpretation. So this is, I noticed I said something and then I saw you, you know, punch the wall. And that's like, okay, what happened there? We're not saying we're not interpreting, what that punch in the wall meant. It's just saying factually, your fist hit the wall after I said this statement to you. Asking open-ended questions to improve understanding. So the who, the what, the where, and the when. And in this repair process, that keeps those lines of communication open. Taking accountability, so having patience when your child struggles with that accountability. Share how you feel. Even if your child's unwilling to share, modeling that behavior will help them get to that point that they're willing to share. And then discussing what can be done differently next time, because what has happened has happened. We need to move forward. So if the child is not willing to engage, you can model this, talk about it. You can even throw out some ideas to them and let them know that, you know, you're open to hearing their ideas if anything comes to mind. We're open to talking about this again if they're willing.
So a lot of people come and they say, okay, I've figured out how to regulate myself. I understand what's causing these big emotions to happen, or I have some ideas of what's causing them to happen. I've processed how they trigger me. I processed what I can do, but I really want a plan. I really want a plan of action. These behaviors are happening frequently. What can I do in the moment? And so often a lot of my work has to do with behavior plans. As we talked about with attunement, the first step is actually, and a lot of parents come in and they just feel so frustrated by the fact that there is this power dynamic that's at play. There's this imbalance that's at play. There are these big tantrums occurring that are disruptive and distressing for the child and for themselves. And yet I tell them the first thing they need to do is focus on reinforcement and focus on that attunement. What we're doing there is we're building our relational bank. So every time a parent gives a consequence to a child. You've lost screen time for the day. You can't go and see your friends. You're grounded. Every time a caregiver gives a consequence, you are withdrawing money from your relational bank. Consequences are normal. You're supposed to withdraw money from time to time. You need to set boundaries. We need lessons that can be taught and learned through consequences. It's okay. But in order to do that, you have to have a standing balance in that relational bank through the attunement work that Amber discussed and through reinforcement. So reinforcement is what builds that positive relationship and builds that positive bank account. So that way, when you're kind of, right, we can say like you grounded the child, that's the equivalent of taking $10 out of that bank account. We need to make sure you're not overdrafting. What happens when people jump to the consequences, to the punishing of emotional explosions, is what we end up seeing is when the consequence doesn't work because there was no positive reinforcement bank that that child and parent had together. And two, it ends up feeling detrimental to the relationship. And that's both the child feeling frustrated in the situation, but also the parent feeling like there isn't that much positivity in. So the first step is the reinforcement in building this bank before we even think about what we're going to do in the moment with these behaviors. This means increasing your positive time together, increasing child-led time together. There's several theories that talk about special time play, which is really just letting the child lead an activity. There's certain rules that you follow for that, but you're kind of being the sports broadcaster of your child's play. You let them lead the activity. You're saying what you're noticing. You're saying what they're doing. You're mirroring them. A lot of the times, child-adult interactions are hierarchical, are authority-based. And so this allows for us to have more egalitarian or even allows the child to take the lead. This also includes verbal reinforcement, praise, any kind of positive verbal statement. In terms of the CBT world, what we think about is the positive verbal reinforcements you give your child is what they're going to internalize as statements they could use themselves. So when you have a child with explosive emotions, and they're taking a deep breath and it's kind of hoarse, but they're trying to calm down. And you say, great job taking deep breaths. I can see that you're trying to regulate. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. I'm proud of you. The next time they feel overwhelmed, they're going to remember it's okay to feel overwhelmed. I can take deep breaths. I feel proud of myself. So we really want to have verbal reinforcements be a part of building that relational bank as well. And then reinforcement plans. A lot of children that have explosive emotions get over negative stimulus in terms of negative consequences, meaning constantly getting punished, constantly being told that you did something wrong, constantly losing your cool because of a situation. And so it can be really difficult to have that be the main source of interaction between you and a caregiver. So I recommend kind of thinking through reinforcement plans outside of behaviors. This can include things like, I'm going to reinforce you for turning it around or not throwing a tantrum or getting through something that I know is hard, but also just how are you catching your child being good throughout the day? What kind of things, like Amber talked about? Thank you for holding the door for me. What kind of values do you want your family to have? And what kind of values do you want to instill in your child? And can you actually start labeling and reinforcing? A reinforcement plan that is outside of verbal reinforcements may include something like a cotton ball jar, tally marks, or star charts, right? Any kind of token system that allows for a physical counter of the verbal reinforcement. Now, whenever you do a reinforcement plan, that physical token needs to be matched with a verbal reinforcement because, again, that verbal reinforcement is what's going to be internalized by the child. So it is not just, oh, yeah, I put 5 tally marks because you had a good day. It is, okay, you're getting this tally mark because you went to school calmly. And it's happening in the moment, ideally. Great job going to school. I'm putting a tally mark down. And then reflecting on that with the child. Wow, you earned so many tally marks today. How did that feel for you? What made today easier? What made today harder? And kind of having that reflection. During a tantrum, what we recommend doing and what we've kind of already gone through, right, is active ignoring and neutrality in the moment, especially if behaviors are attention-seeking behaviors. We do not want to reinforce it by attending to that behavior. You may attend to the emotion that's underneath. Of course, we only do active ignoring and neutrality if safety is guaranteed in that moment. If you are in an unsafe situation, we need to engage with the child and the behaviors. But when possible, if the kid is like calling you names or is rolling on the ground, we're going to try to actively ignore it and stay neutral and calm. We also are going to give warnings before consequences. So any kind of consequence needs to be known beforehand. So talking with children about, hey, when this happens, this will happen, right? Talking about the attunement of that, oh, A is going to lead to B, and knowing that that is a stable thing. But also warnings like, if you continue to hit, you're going to lose screen time. This is really important because it allows us moments to praise turning it around, where the child was engaging in a behavior, but then was able to turn it around and make a different choice. And praising those moments and reflecting on that can be really reinforcing for coping strategies as well as other emotional regulation tools. And it also sets up consistency. Every time this happens, this is what's going to happen. The more you can stay grounded and calm in your responses, and the more consistent the expectations can be, the easier the child will be able to navigate those moments. And you'll actually see better emotional regulation, because a lot of the times the emotional dysregulation comes from a moment of misunderstanding and surprise of, wait, we're doing what now? Or wait, you're saying what now? And so when we have that expectation, again, ties in beautifully to what Amber talked about with attunement, we can see those emotional dysregulation moments decrease. With consequences, there are 2 pieces that we really want to think about. We want them to be logical and natural when possible. So the example that I think everyone kind of jokes about, you may have heard this, is the parent that's had it, they're done, the kids are running wild, and they say, we're not going to Disneyland anymore. You lost the trip. Now, when you think about being a caregiver or even just being an adult and planning a vacation, are you really going to take Disneyland away? And does that appropriately match having a tantrum or having sibling conflict or having a hard day at school? We want to think about how we can have the scale fit and be a consequence we will actually deliver, right? Because consequences only work when we deliver and follow through with the consequence. So some examples of logical or natural consequences include a child throws a toy in a tantrum and it breaks. The natural consequence is, okay, that toy is broken now. Would you like to spend your own money to buy a new one, keep the broken toy, or throw it away? And the child needs to deal with that natural consequence of when you threw the toy against the wall, it did break. Another example may be, a child throwing food or water or making a mess in the kitchen while emotionally dysregulated. And once you've returned to safety, once things are calm, having the expectation that that child needs to clean up whatever mess ensued during the emotional dysregulation time. So making sure that, again, consequences are given calmly and neutrally, and you are explaining why this consequence is happening and how it logically connects. Sometimes it's difficult to come up with a logical consequence. Someone's having a really bad day, is dysregulated, and it leads to physical aggression in the home. It may be hard to say what is that natural consequence to that physical aggression. When there isn't a clear and natural consequence, you may think about losing privileges, so loss of screen time, loss of going out with friends. With those types of consequences, the more immediate they can be, the better. So instead of saying, well, you had a bad day Tuesday, so you don't get to go see your friends Saturday. For a teenager, maybe that makes sense, but for a young child or even a child in that middle range that we're talking about today, that's going to possibly be too far down the line. And pairing the behavior with the consequence, that gap is going to make that pair even weaker. So we want to think about what can immediately happen. So for example, losing screen time for the rest of the day is an immediate consequence that happens right then. We also, again, my biggest thing with consequences, you need to make sure that you're calm when giving them. Consequences given out of anger do not have the same behavioral weight in that, oh, well, mom was really mad and that's why I got grounded, right? Versus, oh, I broke the rule and that's why I got grounded. But they also tend to lead to more emotional dysregulation and feel personal for the child who's getting the consequence, which can lead to it feeling unfair. We also know parents who are emotionally dysregulated when giving consequences, they're the ones who are more likely to give the I'm leaving, no more Disney World, I'm getting rid of the Disney trip. And so when you are in a situation where you're noticing I'm really activated, I think there needs to be a consequence, you can say, this was a really difficult moment. I'm going to take a break, but we're going to have to talk about consequences for the behaviors later. It's okay to step away, just like we talked about with tips and tricks for regulation. It's okay to say, I need a moment to regulate myself before giving what that consequence will be. Sometimes that's helpful then to also rely on your support system. Ask a partner, ask a trusted friend, ask a trusted family member, hey, this is what happened. What may be a consequence that would be appropriate, or run, like, does this consequence feel too harsh? I feel unsure about this. It's okay to activate your support system when thinking about behavior plans for your child. Oftentimes in this population, we see a lot of common parent worries around if this is hard now, what will be what them as a teenager? Oh my gosh, it must be so much worse. How can I convey I care about my child when they're frustrating me? I'll damage my child if they see me angry, but their behavior also feels extreme. So of course I'm angry. And then also, is something wrong with my child? Meaning, is something wrong developmentally, or is something wrong with personality-wise, or the symptomology-wise? Is something diagnosable there? For all these situations, a lot of times it comes from this connection to your child and feeling your own feelings of frustration and feeling overwhelmed, wanting to do everything right. Spoiler alert, there is no such thing as a perfect parent. There is no such thing as a perfect human. We are all going to make mistakes. It is much more about the repair work you do as a parent that matters. That's what conveys the caring about my child, is how I calmly express my frustration, but also how I really focus on how do I repair with my child? When I make a mistake, what do I do? When I say something out of anger, or when we go through, even if you handle the emotional dysregulation gold star, like Amber and I are like, oh my gosh, you have an honorary degree in counseling because you handled this so well. You could teach a class on it. Even in those situations, it's still emotionally tiring. There's still a rupture that can happen there. And how do you show I care enough about you that I'm going to engage you in this relationship? I'm going to repair this relationship, and I'm going to explain maybe my feelings, maybe apologize for things that were wrong, but also feel heard and also hear you and see you in these feelings. In terms of I'll damage my child if they see me angry, one of the most helpful things a parent can do is explain anger, is show anger. And I don't mean show anger in terms of show anger dysregulated, but show anger calmly. You can say, wow, this really frustrates me. Or you said that and that really hurt my feelings. we get this idea in our society that anger is a bad feeling, or anxiety is a bad feeling, or sad is a bad feeling. Yet these are natural components of being human. And so your child's going to feel angry. And if you can show them, yeah, I'm noticing I'm angry. What do I do with that feeling? How do I calm myself down? Also, what is this feeling trying to tell me? And is there anything positive I can take from this feeling? That can actually be a really important learning moment for a child. It's also natural for your child to do things that make you angry because every, like as Amber said, you could be sitting in traffic and get angry at a stranger, right? And children can be wild and they can do things that make you laugh uncontrollably because they're so um, impulsively beautiful in that way. And they can also do things that make you feel angry. And that is okay. It is okay to feel angry in the moment. Your feelings are always valid. What matters is your behavior, because on a behavioral level, we have a choice and a responsibility, and that's true for the parent as well as true for the child. The first worry that I have on this slide and the last worry tend to be more about the anxiety that lives in future predictions, right? Wanting to predict the future. It is natural when we go through a hard moment to say, I want there to be a light at the other end. I want there to be a rainbow after the storm. What if it doesn't come? I'm really worried about it. So I wanted to share some stats from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So when we look at diagnosable behavioral or like emotional dysregulation disorders, 67% of children show improvement in symptoms just naturally. And of that 67%, symptoms resolved in 3 years. So the majority of the population that experiences these emotional dysregulations, this high emotional intensity, is going to have some growth that naturally comes from maturing. That being said, therapy and working with a therapist, maybe through parent strategies, but also your child having an outlet for these big feelings can even lead to more growth in this area. And then out of that population that does get diagnosed with a behavioral or conduct diagnosis during this age range, only 30% show that behavioral dysregulation continue and to adolescence, continue into high school as a diagnosable level of behavior and emotional dysregulation. And out of that, only 10% eventually may show some symptoms related to a personality piece of this, right? And that can be something as simple as just like you have a high sensitive feeling kiddo. But the reason I bring up those stats is because one, it's a very small part of the population that will have these dysregulation continue in a way that impacts functioning, right? Because to be diagnosable, it needs to impact functioning. Very little population will have it continue that way. But if this is something that makes you feel worried about, well, what will this look like? One, naturally, you may see some improvement as the child's brain continues to develop and their emotional regulation skills continue. Second, if you use the skills here, you may see even more skill development from your child. You may see more emotional regulation. They may be super feelers. They may be able to have these big feelings, but they may be able to label and regulate them better. But third, if this is something that you are still like, you know what? I hear you, Dr. Horvitz. I hear that's going to get a little bit better. I hear the stats say it's going to get a little bit better. Likely, high likelihood, 90% of kids, right? Okay. And I hear that there are things I can do. I'm still feeling a little nervous. Then this is really a time we want to think about more support. In terms of more support, we've included several different types of our go-to book recommendations for parents who are dealing with our super feeler kids that have really big emotions and show those big emotions through behavior difficulties. You also can reach out for support for therapists. We have a wonderful child adolescent therapy team, as well as a cognitive behavioral therapy team with some of us who see children and teens that are more than happy to work with you and your family around supporting those emotional skill developments. The Family Institute is a wonderful organization that allows systemic support. So it's really a place where you're going to be engaged with as a parent, but also parent-child and also and also child. So we're going to work with all the systems here. Therapy for your child and you may be really beneficial in building that attunement, building regulation skills for yourself, but also for that child, and breaking down the moments of dysregulation so you can really learn what your child is trying to communicate and how that child can possibly find other tools. Thank you so much for your time. Our website is listed, and we hope that this was a helpful and enlightening conversation.